Good afternoon. My name is Gad Lebanon, and I'm the head of the Labor Market Institute here at the Conference Board. And welcome to our special webcast about preparing for the post-pandemic labor market. In this webcast, we're going to talk about several issues. First, I'll give you a brief overview of where the US labor market right now is and in the near future. And then we'll focus more on the longer term. One issue that is on everyone's mind is the future of remote work, and we'll discuss that a little. There is, of course, a lot of expectation that given that we are at such high unemployment rate, it's going to be a very loose labor market, but we're not sure that this is the case. So we will discuss some reasons for that. A very important part of this webcast is skills, and given the change in the future of work and where we'll come out from that crisis, we're going to talk a lot about the skills and skill gaps in the future of the US labor market. And we'll also talk about some of the main factors that will change in the labor market in the next 5 years or so, and which industries and occupations will be most disrupted. As always, we have some credits for you if you're interested. The HRCI, SHRM, CPE. You typically type your full name, email address, specify which credit you're looking for, and it's available only for the live webcast. And at least in the case of CPE, there will be 3 pop-ups that occur during the program, and you should click OK if you're interested in that. As always, if you have questions, don't wait until the end. There is a chat box where you can put your questions on the bottom left, and please type them. Depending on the volume of questions, we'll try to take as many as possible during the webcast, so please just type in. Today with me is Matt Siegelman, the CEO of Burning Glass Technology. And some of you may remember him from an earlier webcast that we did in June. That was fantastic. So welcome back,
Great to
Matt.
be back together, Gad. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah. And yeah, so let's begin. I'll start with a brief labor market outlook, which I want to temper your expectations. It's not going to be great news. So, you know, with a lot of us were hoping that come summertime, the spreading of the virus will gradually die down and the economy will recover. Unfortunately, that is not the case. There is a lot of continuous spreading. You know, weather may be impacting on the margins, but it's clearly not the game changer that some of us were hoping for. As a result, our outlook, economic and labor market outlook deteriorated. We now think that if you compare the US economy in December compared to pre-COVID, you'll find out that it will be 6 to 9% smaller, which is a big number. Just to give you a comparison point, during the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, during the entire drop there, we just reached 4% negative growth in GDP, and here we are 6 to 9%, so a bigger recession. And a lot of it is concentrated in those industries that are sensitive to social distancing, like the usual suspects, like travel, entertainment, restaurants and such, but also it's broader than that. Like, for example, we've seen that kind of elective health operations were also significantly hit, although they are recovering to some degree. So it's quite a lot of industries that are probably not going to fully recover for a very long time. We expect the unemployment rate, which the true unemployment rate is now at 12.3%. We expect it to remain in the 11 to 15% rate for the next year. But what we also find out that even though the unemployment rate is so high, the labor market, the amount of slack in the labor market is not as big as the unemployment rate suggests, and I'll discuss some of the reasons for that. But overall, the combination of very loose labor market and a very weak inflation are likely to lead to a very slow wage growth. Not immediately, but in the next year or two, we should expect that. This is a very industry by industry recession. Some will be significantly hit, some will be less hit. But so it's very important to pay attention to the industry story and the specific types of jobs, and we'll do a lot of that in this webcast. As a kind of reflecting the new phase in this economic recovery, so we have here the number of online job ads from our Help Wanted Online measure. This is for those of you who are not in the earlier webcast, in collaboration with Burning Glass Technologies, we produce the Help Wanted Online data, which is essentially covering almost all job boards in the US and collecting all the ads and classifying them by location, industry, occupation, and essentially every type of information that is on the job ad, we are able to classify and document. So what we see here, this is essentially the same line, but in one is a 2-week moving average and one is a 4-week moving average, which is a little smoother of the number of online job ads. You've seen during March and April there was a big drop in those numbers, and then a recovery as states started to open up. But in the last several weeks we are seeing a downward trend again, which is not we see a decline, which is not surprising given that many states stopped reopening or even reinstated some restrictions on the economy. Now we wanted to see where we see a bigger decline in job ads, so we kind of looked at the different divisions in the US. Overall, there is, I would say, more similarity than differences. You know, the division with the smallest drop is the Middle Atlantic, which is New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. The one with the largest drop is Pacific. But all in all, I would say there is a pretty much across the board we see this level of drop.
Gad, a question for you.
Matt,
you know,
yeah.
like you, we've been spending a lot of time looking at the geographic complexion of kind of where jobs have been, hiring has been falling off over the last few weeks. Originally we were tracking green shoots. I guess those green shoots are dying, so maybe we should call them wilted shoots or something like that. It's interesting when you sort of break it down to the state level. We found probably, because you're right, at the regional level, I think the regions sort of tend to compress toward the median. But we found that, for example, in Nevada, jobs have actually continued to grow. Illinois slightly, a couple of other places. Actually, the Rust Belt in general has been not so rusty. Most Rust Belt states doing a little bit above average, with a couple of significant exceptions that are bringing down the average. But then you'll also see places like Rhode Island and Vermont, which are just absolutely tanking. Massachusetts, absolutely tanking. And then when you sort of think about where's the biggest impacts happening of the infection, there doesn't seem to be a correlation. I'm wondering if you're seeing anything, whether it's sectoral. What are you seeing there?
Right. So I think when you look at the type of job ads that dropped the most, we saw that the number one was food services, which makes a lot of sense because they are, in many places they stop the dining in, and um, so. But then when you look at other categories of jobs that suffered from a large drop, you've seen computer related and engineering related. So that is not directly related to the opening of restaurants, but it could be that what's happening is that the overall outlook and optimism of employers diminished a little in recent weeks as we see that um, the pandemic is with us for a long time, probably, so they may have cut jobs that are more related to long-term projects because they don't need as much capacity, or they think the potential for new products is more limited. So maybe that explains. So it could be that there are a lot of things going on here beyond just where they are opening or closing down restaurants and such. Yeah. Um, so moving to the another topic. So here I mentioned the unemployment rate. This is our forecast for the rest of the year. We have here the official unemployment rate and the adjusted unemployment rate, which corrects for an admitted error by the Bureau of Labor Statistics on how they measure unemployment. But in any case, through the end of the year, we're expecting a highly elevated unemployment rate. And one would expect usually when the unemployment rate is very high, there are a lot of job seekers per job opening, and you'd expect that it would be very difficult to find a job and very easy to find qualified workers. But that is not quite the case. In this chart, I show you in the red line the unemployment rate, and in the blue line, I show from our consumer confidence survey, the percent of respondents that are saying that jobs are hard to get. So you see, usually those two lines are highly correlated, move in tandem, but except for the most recent months, we see a huge increase in the unemployment rate, whereas the percent who say jobs are hard to get is now at 24%, which is higher than where it was in February, but it is not historically high. Um, so there is the largest disconnect between those two lines is right now. And the same is also if I put here measures of difficulty of finding qualified workers, we would get also the largest disconnect ever. So why do we see this disconnect? Um, the reason is that even though there are a lot of people who are unemployed or counted as unemployed, many of them are not actively or seriously looking for a job right now for several reasons. One, many of them are hoping that they are on just a temporary layoff, and they are hoping that their old jobs are waiting for them, so they are not looking for a new job. Many of them are benefiting from the generous unemployment benefit, and just in one study, they estimated until now about 2/3 of people who are unemployed actually have a higher income than when they were employed. So under such environment, at least some are not anxious to get back to working. There's also a risk of infection in many jobs, and people are not excited about going back to the front line in such an environment. And the lack of childcare is also a major issue for families with young children. There is no solution. Schools were closed. Now a lot of summer camps and other arrangements are closed. So again, difficult to go back to such a um, to normal working. Some of it may change. We are going to hear soon what's happening to the unemployment benefits, but the most likely outcome is that they'll be less generous. Many people who are expecting to come back to their old jobs will find out that they are not waiting for them. So we are expecting some of those people who are not seriously looking for a job to start looking seriously, and so then we will see probably more slack than we currently see.
for you there. I mean, like, I look at those conclusions, and I think the page prior, which it comes from, which is actually, as you said, a stunning disconnect. All what you've pointed to on the next slide really says to me that people who have been displaced right now are thinking about this more as a furlough than they are thinking about it as unemployment. I'm wondering, we know from past recessions that when employers start to hire back, they don't necessarily hire back the same people they let go. First of all, they're reticent to hire back, but when they do, they often are hiring back people with different sets of skills, and we'll talk more about that later. When do you think the reality sets in for people that maybe they're in for the long haul?
It may already hit them because we saw an increase in employment in May and June, but it's not clear that in July we've seen another increase, and I don't know about August, but it could be that a lot of people, especially in if you're in a restaurant that opened in some capacity and it's not opening further, then because you can't eat inside. So I think people will realize that there isn't further increase in employment. So I wouldn't be surprised if that reality setting in is happening as we speak. Yeah. Okay, I am. So let me go quickly through some of those. This is just to show that also fewer people are quitting their jobs in this environment. In every recession, fewer people are quitting their jobs. And I also, here we see the increase in the unemployment rate by occupation. This is not surprising. Between February and June, you see that not surprisingly, in personal care and services, food preparation, entertainment, we see the largest increases in unemployment rate. I want to point out the category of office and administrative support that also saw a big drop, even though they are not directly related to those social distancing industries necessarily. I think there is a lot of issue of automation. Most of the automation in the last decade was not in manufacturing and blue-collar jobs, but it was in office and administrative support, clerical positions. So it could be that there is a lot of pent-up demand in the ability of technology to replace employment in those types of jobs. So meaning that it could be that the drop in this occupation is more permanent than in some of the others.
This slide also fascinated me, Gad. Oh, sorry, Gad. I was just going to say this slide also fascinated me because, you're looking here at unemployment rate. As you know, we spend a lot of time looking at hiring activity through the lens of job postings, and they don't align. There's a lot of disconnects here. For example, and we'll talk more about this later, we've seen a lot of the kind of innovation occupations in, for example, computer math, in business and finance operations have actually seen significantly bigger declines in the market overall. Conversely, there's a lot of hiring that's been happening. Not surprising, there's been a lot of focus on logistics, on Amazon and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of transportation and material moving hiring, in fact, those have been growth occupations over the course of the pandemic, and yet high rates of unemployment here. Curious your take on that.
Yeah, well, I think that the hiring is also relates very much to where there were layoffs to begin with, because a lot of the hiring is to replace the people who were laid off a few months ago. So I think you may see a lot of hiring in types of jobs that have high unemployment rate because they had very big layoffs to begin with. That may be one explanation. I think that the computer and mathematical is a bit of a conundrum because we do see continuously weak hiring numbers in computer-related jobs, yet that's the group of occupations that experience the smallest increase in unemployment rate. That may be because they didn't fire many people or lay off a lot of workers in that group of occupations to begin with. But I don't have a great answer to
there's
that.
one of the people on the chat function I see said that we had a lot of unfilled IT positions that our firm kept running online ads for. Easier to cut unfilled positions than filled positions, and I think it may be exactly that these have been very hard to fill jobs, and so I think firms are probably loath to get rid of talent that they've worked hard to get. But that said, the fact that firms have pulled back from hiring in those areas says something about their level of confidence in the pace of recovery.
Yeah. Yes, no, that's absolutely correct. We are getting a lot of questions, so let me just quickly go through some of them that um, there is. Do you project an increase in contingent freelance workforce given the job market? That's a good question. I think in general, when you look at it from the temp help perspective, the temp help industry, you do see large drops during a recession, and we see that now as well because a lot of companies prefer to first lay off their temp help workers before they touch their own employees. But I think, and that relates to our next topic, it could be that the rise in remote work will also impact the trends related to contingent freelance gig. I mean, if people say you don't need to be in the office anymore, maybe you don't need to be an employee anymore. So there may be, not in every case, but there may be, it will create more discussion in many companies around that. I don't know, Matt, any thoughts on that one?
I think I agree with what you've said. I think we'll talk more in a few minutes about the remote work spectrum and the implications of this for remote work. I think inevitably the growth of remote ability of jobs will increase the also sort of in parallel with that. I think you're going to see an expansion of alternative work arrangements, and so I think that's going to suggest that we will see an expansion of people working in contingent. I think you're also going to see the same thing from demand. As we were talking about a few minutes ago, employers tend to be reticent to hire people back. And so in that kind of context, hiring people in a contingent fashion, to your point, Gad, is going to be likely to be very attractive. So I think both from the supply side and the demand side, there's reason to believe that contingent work arrangements are likely to be a growth part of the job market.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. There's be some comments here on the definition of unemployment and how can I say that people who are unemployed are not actively looking for a job, because in most cases this is the condition for being counted as unemployed. So furloughed people are counted as unemployed even if they're not actively looking for a job. So that's one example. And some, as there is another comment here, some states did waive the work search requirement for getting unemployment benefits. I'm trying to see. Oh, there was already a good. Can you hear me? Someone saying that I'm on mute. Matt, can you hear me? Okay. Good. It would have been terrible if I was talking to myself the whole time. Okay. Okay, you know what? Let's make sure that we cover most of what we wanted to talk. Let's move to the next topic, which is remote work. So, I think there is a growing consensus that we will see in the future, not just now, but even after the pandemic, an increase in the share of remote work. But the big question is in what types of jobs will we see it. So one hint is that to look at where there has been growth in recent years. So what we have here is comparing the first half of the 2000s versus 2018 and see where do we see the largest increase in the percent of full-time employees primarily working from home. And not surprising, a lot of it was in white collar, especially computer and mathematical. Um, so that's where we are likely to see a lot of the increase moving forward. I also want to point here another group that is, I think, going to be especially disrupted. That's the office and administrative support workers that I mentioned earlier as the group that is likely to be heavily automated. But here we see that at 3.3% in 2018, it was still well below most of the white collar jobs, but that may significantly change moving forward. Now, one of the reasons why this number was smaller was because a lot of office and administrative support workers are hourly or non-exempt workers, as we can see here. Here we see the share of hourly paid workers in total employment by several of the office-related occupation groups. So by far the highest one are the office and administrative support, much higher than the kind of the higher educated white collar jobs. And when you're hourly or non-exempt and you're entitled to overtime payment, it's very important for employers to monitor the number of hours. And traditionally, they found that it's much easier to do it when you are in the office, and they were more reluctant to let those clerical administrative support jobs be done from home. But COVID smashed those barriers completely because for a while everyone needed to work from home. And so, you know, getting a hint about the future, we look at using again the online job ads information. The Burning Glass is able to flag or indicate job ads that are indicating work from home. And we see that we have two bars here. One is for before COVID and one is after COVID. And we see a large increase across the board, but especially in some of those office support occupation clerical jobs. So it could be that one of the within the big legacy of this crisis of just higher remote work rates, it's going to be especially large in the increase in those office support jobs. So that, and this is a big group. It's probably 10% of all workers in the US are in that group, and every company has many of those. So, so this is something that will have a big impact. So, Matt, I'm handing it over to you. You have a lot of exciting material. So let's talk about it.
Great, thanks so much. Just excited to join you in this. You framed this up well at the start. One of the questions that, or one of the assumptions I think that most of us would make is that you're in a market where 40 some odd million people have been displaced, where 20 some odd million people are UI claimants, that where we're going to see a reverse of the polarity of the market from being a seller's market to being a buyer's market, that there's going to be a lot of slack, and that all of the concerns that we've been thinking about over the last few years around skill gaps and why they exist and where they exist are all going to be distant memories. And here to provide a little bit of a perspective that might run counter to that. And so want to remind all of us that when we talk about a skill gaps are, and I know this is going to sound obvious, but skill gaps are about skills. And why it's worth pointing out is that we tend to think about them in broad language. And usually when we say a skill gap, what we really mean is a job gap. And what we're actually seeing instead is an acceleration of change in the demand for skills, in the configuration of jobs in terms of the skills they require, which could lead to some significant disjoints. So I'm glad to sort of delve into that as Gad shared. Burning Glass is lucky to have a unique perspective on some of these questions. But the work that we do collecting literally millions of job postings every day and studying hundreds of millions of people's career histories around the world each year, and aggregating it up at a level where we can understand what is changing market by market, sector by sector, and to really delve down below the level of government statistics to understand jobs and skills. So let me straight in. One of the things last time, Gad, that you and I spoke, we were talking about the innovation economy and the kind of impact of COVID-19 on hiring inside the innovation economy. What I'm talking about here is jobs in fields like software development, in product development, product marketing, product management, various kinds of engineering. Essentially trying to look at the sorts of jobs whose output long-term, right? If you're an airline and you're not flying planes, you lay off flight attendants, and it's a hard reality. If you're a restaurant and you're not serving customers, you lay off your servers. It's another hard reality. If you stop hiring for software development, that's actually less about what you're producing today. The output of a software developer is going to often not be seen for a few or several quarters. They're coding up some whiz-bang application that might come out sometime next year. So when you see hiring inside innovation fields pull back, that has some significant implications for the shape of the recovery that we can expect. Because very quickly that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what you're seeing here through these lines is that over the course of June, up until the last few weeks when hiring has turned south again, as Gad showed at the start, but we saw that a lot of most sectors actually picked back up in terms of most industries rather, and occupation families. What we're seeing is that sectors like tech, like design and media, like engineering, like science and research have all continue to fall. So if you look at May 3rd was sort of the week of May 3rd was the overall market trough. But those sectors actually continue to fall. Some of them had actually already fallen below market average. So they've been significantly impacted. And so that says something about the kind of confidence that firms have. So I just wanted to do a little bit of follow-up there in terms of what we've talked about in the past. So going back to this question about a skills gap, one of the things that we know is that when employers start to hire back up again, and we've seen this time and again across past recessions, they don't necessarily hire back the same people they let go. Any hiring decision is a future future projection of what you think you're going to need in the future. Both in terms of the amount of labor, but also in terms of what labor you need. And so even if you're hiring people back into the same kind of job, if you expect that in the future you're going to need people in that job to have a different set, then you're going to prioritize hiring people with those new sets of skills. So on the one side, that means somebody who may have been working in a given job for the last 20, 30 years may no longer be qualified to get her old job back. On the other hand, it means that everybody who is hiring for those jobs now is increasing demand for the few purple unicorns who have the leading edge future skills that most people in that field may not have. And so that actually can wind up intensifying skill gaps in various fields. And so let's just sort of see how that bears out. First of all, a point worth bearing out is even before this, the collapse of hiring in the pandemic, one of the things you saw is that the skill gap existed at a bunch of different levels across sectors. So on the one side, you could see even at sort of the peak of hiring, a number of fields where there was well more supply than demand. And at the other hand, you could look at healthcare hiring where you had almost 50% more job postings and there were people to fill those postings. And you could go to specific occupations where there could be twice as much demand as supply. So really the gap was always about skills. And what started to happen is some roles have been mixing skills in weird sort of ways, which increase pressure, which limit supply to those roles. Take the example of a marketing manager. Marketing manager is about as vanilla a professional job as you get. It's one of the most common professional jobs. They clear really quickly. Generally, people are able to fill those jobs faster than a lot of other professional jobs. In the world of tech skills, SQL, which is a common database language, is about as vanilla as tech skills get. But think of it as almost sort of like a Venn diagram when you put together marketing people who tend to be right brain with the SQL skills to be able to manipulate customer data, which is a left brain skill set. The intersection of those two is really small. And so you can see even before the pandemic, you could go from a typical marketing manager making $71,000, those who had various data skills and making about $100,000, which is a 40% premium. Really very significant constriction of supply. And when you constrict supply, then guess what? Prices go up and roles become harder to fill. And you see that bear out across a broad range of roles. Now, that was all before the pandemic. And what we're seeing is the pandemic's actually been accelerating that pace of change. First of all, at the industry level, you're looking at fairly typical role. Here's a role of remote technical support. We're having this conversation remotely, and we also know that we all are participating in a remote economy. So not surprising that there's been a growth in demand for remote technical support. But what's fascinating is to see how the industry complexion of who's looking for this kind of talent has been changing in very significant ways over the last just few months. This is looking at hiring over the course of the pandemic versus the same period last year. Now, what's bearing out at an industry level is actually also bearing out in specific roles. So this is a example from pick just a few different roles, and you'll have to excuse my being a Dylan fan here. The roles they are changing, what you can see here is that just over the space we're comparing is hiring. What are the skills that these roles require that employers are signaling over the last 30 days compared with what they were looking for over the course of 2019? And how much change in relative demand has there been in various skills? Take this example of product managers who are now much less likely to be asked about things like sales or merchandising or business planning or packaging, much more likely to need a set of process skills like Jira or Scrum, much more likely to be called on to look at process improvement questions, to be looking at AI, to be undertaking experiments. Essentially, the job is upskilling. It's moving to be a more tech-enabled, data-driven, and more sophisticated role. And what's fascinating is you're seeing that at all parts of the economy. Look at production techs, right? So these are people working in an industrial setting. Much less demand for them just over the course of the pandemic to be focused on things like manual dexterity or soldering or equipment operation, much more likely to have math skills, to know Kaizen, to be schooled in schematics, in having good organizational skills. So you're seeing these kinds of changes bear out. And as you can imagine, when roles retitrate in profound ways like this, it says a lot about what's going to happen in terms of the supply-demand dynamic. Because the people who are doing these roles today, who have been working in these roles, aren't necessarily going to have these sets of skills that are coming to be really valued. And you can see that across a set of jobs here, even in the world of tech and data jobs, which are the roles that we think are always the ones that are sort of at the forefront of skill change because the technology is changing. Well, actually, some tech and data jobs are changing fast. Some tech and data jobs aren't changing very much at all. And so it really becomes important to be able to understand which ones and what's the mechanism for change. One of the things that we see can drive those kinds of changes is that as new technologies intersect a role, naturally you wind up changing what the broader package of skills that you're looking for. Give an example of mechanical engineers. This is something that we're looking at for a client of ours, a very large automotive manufacturing company. And when you look at a typical skill profile of a mechanical engineer, you are looking for things like project management skills, SolidWorks, AutoCAD, some scheduling, some budgeting. Now, what if you look at a mechanical engineer? So we're not changing a different role. We're not saying this is one of these roles that we're all scheduled to work in that don't exist yet. I always think that's a little bit hyperbolized. But instead, we're saying, what about if you're a mechanical engineer who's specialized in V2I, in vehicle to infrastructure technology? You can see it's almost a totally different package of skills. Same is true if you say, okay, well, now I need a mechanical engineer who's working autonomous systems. Totally different package of skills. And again, the question is, how do we build a supply chain for that kind of talent? Part of that means that you need to start paying attention to what are the skills that already are demanding a premium in various kinds of roles. You can see.
Matt,
Please go ahead.
and just if you go back to this, would you say that all of those should even be called mechanical engineers, or should we call them different things?
It's a great question. And here's why it's a great question. We think about this a lot. And we've got a team of people we call knowledge architecture, constantly figuring out, okay, it's almost sort of philosophical. When does a job become no longer the same job because it's changed so much? And I think it's part of, in some ways, it reflects the real way that new jobs are born, which is to say that you start to develop specialties. And at some point, those specialties become so distinct, there's so little skill overlap between roles that you have to say that these have a very different training route. But it's also a really important question that you're asking, Gad, because when jobs start traveling far apart from the labels that they carry, then it's hard for the market to be efficient. Efficient markets trade in commodities. And when we don't understand each other, when I say mechanical engineer, but you were actually looking for an autonomous systems specialist, and I'm saying mechanical engineer, what we're going to find is that the skills that we're looking for and the skills that people are bringing to the table may not be the same. That's also true for if there are any higher education people in the audience. It's also true from a pipeline. If employers are saying we need mechanical engineers, but what they're starting to really need is autonomous system specialists, guess what? I'm going to be producing the wrong kinds of mechanical engineers. And so you can wind up with a situation where you're graduating lots of people into a field and they still aren't getting jobs, even though there's significant demand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And again, I think useful to look at within any given role, what are the sets of skills that are premium skills? Because this is, you can see here, in any given role, there's sets of skills that are infusing that role, and which are causing that role which are coming to be more sought after. And so thinking ahead to that means building a pipeline to what will be the future-ready skills. Take, for example, a production supervisor increasingly needing Six Sigma skills, needing budgeting skills. People who have those command salary premiums. How do you make sure that you're ahead of that game? So part of being able to get there is being able to look ahead to where we think the market is going, because that's how you can, we've been talking a lot about the kind of impacts of COVID on the market. The real question is going ahead, looking ahead, how do we skate to where the puck is going? Again, sort of the Wayne Gretzky school of workforce management. We've been working to model some core secular trends that we think are going to have a very important bearing on the complexion of hiring in the recovery and beyond. Specifically, we've been tracking 4 core themes. One we call the readiness economy, another we call the remote economy, we call something else the automated economy, and then the last one, I'll buy a beer for anybody who can help us come up with a better name than the diversified economy, but I'll explain in a minute what that is. So please feel free to email me, and I'll send you, I'll raise the ante, I'll make it a case. With regard to, just to sort of give an example, maybe we'll work through the example of the readiness economy. Thomas Friedman from the New York Times said COVID-19 is not a black swan event, it's a black elephant event. It was the elephant in the room that we were all ignoring. Well, we're not ignoring it anymore. That says that both industry and government is likely to do a lot of hiring to be ready for future kind of weaknesses in the economy now, or future events. That's not just pandemics. That's also going to be cyber attacks. It's readiness for physical infrastructure collapses. It's readiness for environmental catastrophe. When you think ahead to that, that says that there are likely to be, under any one of these headings, and by the way, just to go back for a second, remote economy is, as you can imagine, there's technology that's going to need to underlie the kind of conversation we're having today, but also it's going to have a profound impact on where jobs are, how they get filled, diversified economy around, kind of as a manufacturers seek to diversify their supply chains and bring perhaps some jobs, particularly advanced manufacturing jobs, back on shore. An automated economy has more and more jobs, is more both for safety reasons and for productivity reasons. More and more workers wind up working in remote environments. Each of these has a talent footprint. And thinking ahead to what are the kind of sets of talent that are going to need to support these is very important, because it can help us figure out how do these likely intersect our own industries, what are the talent sets that we're likely to need, and how do we build a pipeline for those now. Let's dive into the readiness economy to try to think about some of that, some of the sort of sets of skills that are going to drive that. So readiness economy, again, spanning biotech, cybersecurity, green tech, healthcare, infrastructure. Each of those has certain sets of skills that are growing super fast. Whether it's thermodynamics and green tech, whether it's psychology and behavioral health in healthcare, out from being cooped up inside for 5 months, whether it's process improvement, biotech. All of those have been growing super fast, and we can project forward. We'll use the example of cybersecurity. There's certain sets of skills that are core to the role. There's certain sets of skills that have come to be that aren't necessarily required across broad kinds of jobs, but are really coming to be distinctive specialties. And there's certain sets of skills that are kind of popping out of nowhere. And are coming to redefine the landscape. So, for example, one of the things we see in cybersecurity is that more and more cybersecurity jobs have, as is, been really hard to fill, but where the puck is going in cybersecurity is toward cloud security and IoT security. It's not the majority of cybersecurity hiring today, but you can see the growth rate be really high, and that suggests something about what we need, the pipeline that we need to build. So if you're trying to broaden the pool, then the question is, how do you do it, right? If we anticipate these kinds of supply shortages, we need strategies for being able to, we need strategies for being able to address those. We've got the little quip here: 1 million available wait staff doesn't help fill a single cybersecurity opening. And so what are the strategies? And I want to focus on 2. One that Gad was already talking a little bit about, so we'll go quickly, is around the remote economy. One of the things we found is that obviously there's a good correlation, not a perfect correlation, but a good correlation between how digitalized the job is and how remote it is. And so you can assess that sort of question and be able to move things forward. Obviously, not all jobs within that spectrum are going to be, that are equally digitalized, going to be equally remotable. As you can imagine, electrical engineers and computer programmers, you can work from home at some point. If you're building a circuit or splicing a wire, you've got to be at the bench, at the lab bench. So we can undertake that kind of assessment on a role-by-role basis. The other strategy I'd like to propose speaks to another key imperative of this moment, and that's the imperative of equity. A lot of companies are giving a lot of important self-reflection right now to how we can be more equitable, how we can make sure that we're being more inclusive. And I'd like to propose that pursuing greater equity in employment, building greater pipelines of diversity can be not just a responsibility, but a strategy. And here's why. Because we're used to thinking about diversity as being a zero-sum game. That is to say, there's a limited pool of people who are from diverse backgrounds. And so ultimately, we tend to be very focused on hiring. You know, we recently saw that Google announced they're going to spend a few $100 million to focus on diversity, very important and ambitious effort. A lot of the focus, though, is on hiring. To use an extreme example, chemical engineers, I think, are 6% people of color. It's one of the occupations there is. It would be very hard to hire a pool of chemical engineers who are broadly representative of the population. And so the question is instead, are there ways that we can upskill people into roles? To move people from areas of talent that are more diverse to areas that are less diverse. This example of an electrical engineer, as you can imagine, there is a clear pipeline from an electrical engineer to being an engineering manager. What are the sets of skills that we can train somebody on? What are the credentials that they need to give? What are the foundational skills? When you can make that kind of jump, then diversity can actually be a way of growing the pie. Here's an example from from a very operational field. Shipping clerks are 41% people of color, make only $27,000 a year. You take a shipping clerk and you teach your Microsoft Excel and inventory management, you've got an inventory specialist making $33,000 a year. Only 31% of those are people of color. Teach her scheduling and basic project management, and she can step up to being an operations coordinator making $37,000, and only 20% of those, a little over 20% of those are people of color. So the opportunity here to grow the pie is a good example of some of the ways that we can start to think in very different ways about how we can have a greater supply of talent when we anticipate the kind of talent shortages that this market may portend. And that's something that we can see every
I just wanted to say about this one that this is one of the best slides I've ever seen. I really do. I think there is so much in there. So just congratulations. I had to say it.
Thank you so much. That's high praise coming from you, Gad. I really appreciate it. So let me come back to you, Gad. By the way, if anyone wants a copy of any of these, feel free to email me on the address here. Gad, I know we only have a few minutes left. Let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Matt. The next section that I will mostly have to skip because we are close to the end of time, but I think we will have it in future presentations. But let me just tell you what are some of the underlying factors that will shape the US labor market by 2025. And later on, I was also planning to talk about what are the implications for that for the most impacted industries, but some of the underlying factors. So I think probably the biggest legacy of the COVID pandemic in terms of the economy is remote working and the decline of geography. So there will be a permanent increase in remote work. I can't, let's say, if I had to guess, if now about 5% of all office-related jobs are done from home, not now, before the pandemic, 5%, I wouldn't be surprised if in the long run, in like 2, 3 years, even after the pandemic is gone, this number will be 20 or even 30%. So I think it will be a very large increase. And as a result, perhaps the location is going to be less important. If you can do the job from home, then home can be anywhere. So there'll be more recruiting flexibilities across geographies, with potentially even offshoring some of those jobs. Then the growing online purchasing and delivery in like retail, higher education, health, banking, that's another very important trend. The third is increased automation. So in many types of jobs, when to automate and replace workers with technology, it often requires a reorganization of a lot of processes, and companies don't have the energy to do it in regular times, but when companies are in a survival mode or are in desperate need to cut costs, then they are more likely to do that. So in many types of jobs that I mentioned earlier, the um, office and administrative support workers, that's one job that will going to be significantly reduced, I think, moving forward. Also, the magnitude of the crisis, this is a huge thing. Um, some industries will have so many bankruptcies, and that the entire ownership structure will change, a lot of mergers and acquisitions, a lot of private equity. So a few years from now, many industries, especially the hardest hit ones, are going to look very differently. And finally, another long run trend is the decline of city centers, areas where are based on office buildings where people come to work in. If a few of them come to them to work, then you'll see probably a decline in those areas, because when you stop coming to an area for work, you also spend much less on those on food and shopping and dentists and other things are around. So those are some of the main trends as we kind of think economy-wise, what the economy would look like and the labor market would look like in 2025. Unfortunately, we don't have much more time to elaborate on that. So I would just go through, remind you that there is a lot at the conference board related to COVID and the labor market, and you are in this slide you see some other events that we have coming up. Also, we have a podcast series that you're welcome to listen to, and finally we have the hub for all COVID-related things, so you're welcome to visit this as well. So thank you very much for joining us. Matt, thank you so much for sharing your insights. It was, as always, great to have you. And for the rest of you, have a great rest of the day. Thank you.